with the Firemen's Association of the State of New York, and we are at Northwell Health, and it's studied cancer in volunteer firefighters in New York State. We have a lot of people to acknowledge, and we decided to put the acknowledgement slide up first because the study can't be done or could not have been done without the help of so many people, both from FASD and the foresight to get us to do this work. And I just wanted to highlight not only our wonderful staff at Northwell who helped with this, but two chiefs in particular. And we have that presentation just before lunch about getting folks involved at the ground level. And Chief Martins and Chief Irish really helped us with how to best do data collection from the standpoint of getting information from the firehouses into the easiest format for them to give us information. And Chief Irish was really wonderful with the decontamination kits that we ended up giving out as incentives for folks to participate. So there were two study goals, which were to determine whether cancer incidence and mortality among New York State volunteer firefighters was more than expected in the general population, and provide estimates of the type of cancers and the number of cancers expected in order to support cancer prevention and screening programs. So this was really important, and one of the things, I'm sure you don't remember the slide that Dr. Prezant said was this most important slide from the World Trade Center. I have an interest in World Trade Center since I helped start the responder cohort for the World Trade Center, and I run one of the World Trade Center programs in New York, so it's near and dear to me. But if you look at the colon cancer rate, the mortality is about 0.46. Meaning that you have a 54% lower risk of dying from colon cancer in our cohort of all the World Trade Center responders. And that's because the World Trade Center programs pay for colonoscopy. So I think that's part of the reason, because we know that prevention can work. If we can identify these things, people will say, well, you find these cancers, what can we do with it? We can look to target prevention programs for all firefighters based on the knowledge we can. So why study volunteer firefighters? Well, as we all saw, the numbers of volunteer firefighters far exceed the number of career firefighters. And they have not been studied as readily as career firefighters for a whole variety of reasons. It's a lot easier when you have employment records and you have unions that can help and support in gathering the data. But what are some of the factors that make it important to study volunteer firefighters? One, they may have less PPE, which is very cost. They may have less training. They may be less fit and older. They may have other jobs and exposures. Many of them also are career firefighters, so they have both career and volunteer firefighting. And then we're not sure about the healthy worker effect. Are they more reflective of the community, or do they have other factors, or are they healthier than the community rated healthy worker effect that you see in career firefighters? Is there cigarette smoking use the same, or what you see in the community? Some differences between the volunteers, perhaps, and career is the fewer hours in the firehouse. And there may be fewer structural fires they respond to, depending on the community. And in general, it's less focused on urban environments and more in suburban, rural environments. So the nature of firefighting might be similar. So structural firefighting, we'll hear more about this. This is obviously not my area of expertise. But it does generate an enormous range of exposures and hazards. And there are, I understand, some new guidelines for structural firefighting from today's environment, leading to more challenges for you that hopefully Sam and Gina will talk about or in their decon, whatever, but I'm not going to go into it. But what I can talk about are percentages that are elaborated regardless of where you're firefighting. And we've heard about many of these things already, but the typical exposures that are all known to be carcinogenic, these are all category one carcinogens that are known to be a risk factor. What we know about cancer risk in the firefighters comes from career firefighters. And this is using data from McMaster's and Daniels, a 3-city study, found increases in a variety of different cancers. And one of the challenges is that you look at, when you look at many of these, what we also need to look at is, and this was borne out if you look at in the Daniels study, is not just the aggregate number, the total number of cancers. So for example, prostate cancer is elevated, but if you look at subgroups, particularly those under the age of 60 or 58 or 55, the rate of prostate cancer was much higher. This is similar to what we saw early on in the World Trade Center, where we had an increase in multiple myeloma only in folks under 45, who, for any clinicians in the room, multiple myeloma is a risk. Is a cancer that's usually seen when people are in their 60s or 70s, not when people are in their late 30s or early 40s. We saw a number of those, so we said, is there a signal here? And over time, we've seen in some of the World Trade Center studies, in fact, that multiple myeloma has shown up as being increased. So it's important not just to look at the aggregate rates, but when you're doing this, because you want to target prevention. So if we know prostate cancer is elevated in a younger age group, then we're going to target screening that might not be considered from the Preventive Services Task Force, a screening test that everyone should get, but in targeted populations, you would want to look at. We want to make sure that we can get the cancers when they're treatable, if they're detected early or they progress, and that they're easily detected through health monitoring and screening tests. That's the ideal way of looking at various cancers so that you can be treated. One of the impetuses, or one of the, when we started the study, was to get a cancer presumption in New York State for volunteers. And there was, and when we would go to the state legislatures, they kept saying, well, what's the data in volunteers? And we said, well, we're beginning to collect it now, we don't have it yet, but we said that exposure should be the same. It doesn't matter what your category is. But they did sign it in the 2017-2018 legislative session, and it actually was similar to what had been promulgated for career firefighters about 15 years or 20 years earlier in New York State, that was spearheaded by Dr. and some of the work she did back then. So I'm going to transition over to Dr. Golden, who's going to talk about how we work to get to participate in our study.
Good afternoon. So Dr. Moline told you why we did the study. I'm going to tell you how we did the study. I'm an epidemiologist, so numbers are my life. That was our goal in the study. You've heard a lot about cohort studies, different cohorts of career firefighters that have been examined for cancer risk. And the goal and the type of cohort study that we wanted to collect was to get the largest possible study population. It makes sense. The longer we follow people, the longer time there is for cancers to accumulate, but also the larger the population, better chance you're going to be able to find what we call statistically significant findings. That will pass the peer review literature and help ultimately. And this is the first of its kind study. Dr. Moline mentioned it, and the whole conference heard about all the literature that's accumulating on career firefighters. There's been only one all-volunteer study, and that was done in Australia. It's very large, well-conducted study. I encourage you to look it up. It's by Glass et al. And as I said, well done, using the exact same methods that we're presenting today. Same methods that were used in the NIOSH 3-city study. So we knew we had to get a large cohort, and how do you do that? As Jackie mentioned, volunteer firefighters. I should point out, actually, in New York State, over 94% of the firefighters work in volunteer companies. So we're fifth largest in the nation. Delaware, 8%. New York State is 94 point something. So it's the vast majority of our fire service. And Dr. Malene didn't toot her own horn, but she is chair of the Health and Wellness Committee for the Firemen's Association of the State of New York. It's a 150-year-old organization. They have 46,000 dues-paying members. Legislative action is their primary thing, but they're very interested in protecting the fire service, educating, promoting health and wellness initiatives, and Dr. Lee chairs that committee. So they approached her to get the data that they thought they would need to get the cancer presumption bill. Luckily, it passed without the study, but they still continue to support us. We're funded entirely by that. Yet they gave us the scientific independence that they would not see the raw data. We could publish in peer-reviewed literature. They would not control the findings, and they've been very, very honorable partners about this. True partners. So we tried to weigh different ways to establish the cohort. We wanted to make it efficient and easy on ourselves and use records. So we approached the New York State Office of Fire Prevention and Control to see if they could provide us with records for all the firefighters that did trainings throughout the state. We did a FOIL. We'll take the data, so we do an interagency linkage. Could you send those records right to the New York State Cancer Registry, to both state government offices? It was denied. So we had to find another way. So basically, OFPC did give us a list of the 1,700 plus volunteer fire companies as a starting point for our tracking database. Our goal was to contact every single voluntary fire company and combination fire company in the state of New York. So we took this list. We first thought we could again do electronic, sitting at our desk, through emails and phone calls. Pretty quickly that wasn't going to work. Volunteer firefighters have busy lives outside of the fire company. They're not sitting there waiting to read our email, to get our phone call. We obviously made calls in the evenings and weekends when we thought the chiefs would be there. But ultimately, we decided we needed to do a mass old-fashioned direct mailing to every firehouse and fire district in the state. So we came up with this little blurry, but basically the big red envelope that you couldn't ignore when it hit the desk in the firehouse. Had study information, self-addressed envelope, send us back this, enrollment form, but instructions on how to do it electronically as well. We thought we made it very easy. That was the goal. We went around the state and gave presentations at local, regional, and state meetings and fire expos. We did interviews with magazines and newspapers. FASB has their own volunteer firefighter magazine. Plugging that is actually a pretty good resource with lots of information on the fire service. They posted multiple stories about the study, as well as all the regional leaders of FASB. They were not promoted the study. We have two websites, both at Northwell Health and at FASB. There's full instructions on how to do this. Really thought we were doing great in terms of getting the word out there. However, we did do great. We got 135 fire departments over the course of 2 years to submit basically personnel records for all the firefighters that they had information on. Past, present, as far back as they could go. They weren't fussy. We said, give us your full rosters, whatever you have. We did make direct contact only with 78 plus 218, so about 296 companies. We actually spoke with someone in charge who had the authority to compile and release the records. The study was approved by both the IRBs at Northwell Health, Foster Medical School, and the New York State Department of Health, that we didn't have to ask the firefighters to sign informed consent. The study would have been feasible. There are 95 to 100,000 volunteer firefighters in the state of New York who enroll a large percentage, and it would have been not feasible. So we left it up to each fire department or fire district to determine whether their members' information could be submitted. We gave them multiple options. They could opt in, ask the firefighters themselves, can we submit your data, opt out, tell us if you don't want to be on the list, or something we call the full roster, which submitted all records. For any combination, we were very flexible, but they had to make their own decisions, either with a board of directors vote or a membership vote or unilateral decision by the leaders. So as I said, we spoke to 296, 78, sent us thanks right off the bat. It's helpful that we didn't have to continue to pursue them. 218 engaged in the study, but unfortunately, once they tried to collect their data, 35 withdrew, 48 we never could reach again. They reported our calls. But 135 did submit some data, completed what we call the fire department survey. And then about a year in, we instituted an optional feedback survey to ask them. We should have done it right off the bat, honestly. What was easy, what was hard, would you recommend this? And I don't have my testimonial slide up, but honestly, 90% of those who participated said they would encourage other departments, that it wasn't so bad once they got started compiling their rosters. As Jackie mentioned, we did learn from people here at the University of Miami and elsewhere how to make a very good field decon kit. We couldn't do monetary incentives to encourage participation, so we entered participating departments in a raffle. We gave away a dozen to randomly selected departments, and we gave one to the first department. We sent them the data basically the data study. So they got it. We've done some research to follow up and see if there's some using them. We gave them a reorder form with the vendors that get them the same exact equipment that we put in the bucket. And the price is trying to be helpful. So in terms of data collection, I mentioned there was a fire department survey. Ideally, that was done on something called RedCap, which is a secure online data collection instrument. It's a 2-page questionnaire, quite easy to do, about general departmental information and training events. But this is the more important piece. We needed them to either upload an electronic file with personnel records, as I mentioned. I left out gender. I don't know why. It was one of the biggest missing pieces of data, unfortunately, in the record is something that's very helpful when you answer registered link to have a gender. But we did include that as the minimum. Full name, date of birth, and gender, and address for the minimum. And then we also asked for some information on service, how long they've been, when they joined, how long they've been, position, right? We did not ask for social security number. Again, the way these studies are done, when you link to these big government data sets, they use social security number as the ultimate identifying factor. And, but we were told to be a deal breaker. We went into the fire department and said, give us your whole identity and your social. So we did not bother, even though it would make the research easier. Again, we did the feedback survey, and this hasn't been mentioned at this conference. There is this, I'm sure any of you that are asking firefighters report your data to the NFCS system. There are problems with any routinely collected or self-reported data, but this basically is a national system where incident reporting is an attempt to standardize the information that everybody sends. It is problematic in some ways. There have been analyses showing that there are nuances of subjectivity and having composed the incident. But for the most part, we found it pretty reliable in talking to the departments that we work with. The numbers they report to the state and at the federal level. Again, we learned from talking to people about why they participate, why they couldn't participate, and we came up with a David Letterman type list of top 6 reasons. You say you don't want to be in our study, but this is why you actually could. Many of the issues had to do with privacy. They felt that they did not have legal authority to release their fire department's records, that the data wouldn't be kept securely, there could be a breach of the data. What were our intentions? We're using the data we share with anybody else. But for the most part, the pushback had to do, some of it was a potential positive impact, like we know, this has been mentioned over and over again at the conference, we know what we're taking on when we become firefighters. We know our risk, what can we do about it? And is there anything we can actually do about it? We did hear a good deal of previous comments sometimes about. But we did think the two factors, it's hard to measure when you talk to a department to see what factors really help them see the utility, the value of this study. And one was a leader, a chief, an assistant chief, a fire district manager who knew about FASB, knew about the council bill, the long fight to get the production legislation, and believed in the cause, and they somehow made it happen. The other was good records, and I actually took a couple of quotes from, with permission, we did on a feedback survey, asked if we can use their quotes, what would have made the process more straightforward or less of a burden. And number one was if we had kept better records. It's you have so many other tasks as a volunteer chief and their staff. Okay, look, very few departments have significant numbers of paid staff to help them. But most of the information is not readily available, not the kind of information we keep on all members. Yeah, that kind of thing, especially for past members or retired members or deceased members, they did not really have up-to-date information, so they didn't want to send us partial data. Even though we took as much as they could provide. This is just a timeline, and again, we got a slow start in July of 2017. The cancer bill was passed in January of 2018. We thought we might see a little bump when they saw that that battle was won. Maybe now we can keep this going. Slight bump. And then a year in, we did this direct mail, as I said. And again, we got a little uptick, 8, 10 a month. But despite what they tell you, deadlines do work with firefighters. We were told firefighters will break deadlines, although they have to do something. We said we widely publicized the end of the study would be April. We got 28 days. That's in April. So anyone that was planning to do it, well, and did it, which was wonderful. As we saw that, they said, come on, we can do one last push. So again, regional leaders went out with lists. We didn't tell them who was in the study, but we told them people that hadn't made the decision yet. They got an additional 9 data sets in the next 3 months. Total number was 135, I said. So a few results. Again, if you don't know New York State, this is New York State by county. We had 15 counties that submitted no data set, but we really did have a red dot that showed at least one data set throughout the state. So we feel pretty confident that we have a representative geographic sample. Anyone here from Buffalo? Anyone here been to Buffalo? So we went to Buffalo, way up here, order, in January, to a very well organized event by a leader in the community. State legislators were there, representatives of other fire departments. I don't think we got any data sets as a result of that. So we really couldn't predict, I guess we weren't convincing impact in person as we thought we could be. That was interesting, January. But we kept going. We made as many in-person presentations as possible. And we had many representatives, like I said, from the FASB organization helping us out. This is the 11 Association of Fire Districts regions we collapsed across to show the highest percentages were down there in Long Island. Many reasons. The World Trade Center, many of these departments that responded to the World Trade Center site. They're also pretty politically active to procure and FASB organizations. So these had the highest percentages, but the highest, the county that submitted the greatest number of data sets, over 30% in one county. So again, participation was varied, but we feel that we've got pretty good representation throughout the state. A lot of numbers, we'll talk about a few of them in detail. As I mentioned, the majority were volunteer, totally volunteer, all volunteer. We had 2 combination departments. About 70% also provide EMS service. And we did take records for EMS personnel if they have them. We took them and we're hoping we could look at that group. Again, bigger numbers, better ability to look at subgroups. So we did take records for EMS as well. From very, range from very small departments, to quite big departments. And then I'll talk a little bit about the fire runs, wide distribution of activity, and about a third of the departments have gone to the World Trade Center. Again, using another central source of data from the USFA survey, where every couple of years they ask for personnel information from fire departments. We wanted to see if our participants were in fact representative of all departments, or whether the non-participants were different somehow. We need to make the case that we're addressing the full range of problems with cancer and the volunteer service. And again, you can see that probably larger companies, slightly larger companies participated compared to compared to non-participating. They have a little bit more staff to help get the records. And they also seem like they use these computerized personnel data management systems. One of the chiefs just helped us develop a report where they pretty much showed them what buttons to push to produce the spreadsheet that we did. And about 60% did upload digital records. So I think those are the departments that have, good record keeping access, and found it easier to do. And those may be the larger and busier departments. Yeah, in terms of the fire runs, the participating companies had about 750 total incidents per year on average, compared to the non-participating. Fire runs, again, higher than structural fires. So these are very wide ranges within both categories. For context, looking at career fire departments in New York City, excluding SNY, their average number of total runs is about 4,000 a year, range of 35,000 a year. We asked about details about training events. That was on the prior slide. The average was about 4 a year, but again, ranged from 0 to 65. The type of materials that they use at training events, and about 90 out of 135 did use internal lab. At the time. Yeah, we're good. So just in terms of the firefighter records, we scan through every single record that was submitted, every personal record. See if the person's information would be adequate to submit to the cancer registry for linkage. And also to review their service details so that we can categorize them according to position, right? So small numbers, but we started with over almost 19,000 personal records. We had to exclude about 21%, about 4,000 for incomplete data or another reason. Missing data birth was the primary reason. Data birth was the primary reason. The cancer registry, we didn't have social security, they needed at least that unique identifier. The records either they worked in more than one department, volunteers in more than one department, or in their own department. We would like to get one record for firefighter. We didn't include anybody under the age of 18 or born before 1900. We just didn't think they would have been around long enough to get a cancer registered in the state registry. And we did get anyone that was only a career firefighter. Some of them were combination departments, as you saw. We would have liked to have, again, another subgroup looked at in our population, but it's just not enough to get statistics on. And we ended up with 14,800 records. Again, unique, the only multiple volunteer study in the U.S., so we felt pretty good about submitting that. Some of the characteristics, again, not surprisingly, overwhelmingly male, but we did have comparable to the national cohort, 11-12% women firefighters, and we're proud of that. Overwhelmingly white. Most parts did not collect data on race or ethnicity, so we have a lot of missing data. Those were reported, majority of white, Hispanic, and then again, a wide range of birthdays, but 2/3 of the population were born after 1960. So relatively young cohort, but we do have a lot of data from people who were get in terms of the service details. We have data on like the service and things like that, but some basic information on the majority of our firefighters. And I will refer to this, the data in Firefighter, even though we did have small numbers who were compared to combination or even only fire police and probably that was all. And then I get some data on our current status in fire department study. 40% were active and another 70% were inactive or former members, which included the ceased firefighters. And about 60% were currently. So I'm going to do some preliminary results. It's not published yet, but I just want to give you a sense of the distribution of cancers that we're seeing in the volunteers. These data were collected cancers diagnosed through 2018. We have another 2 years of follow-up that's received the data set for, so we'll be adding that soon. But basically, we sent that list of 14,800 to New York State Cancer Registry, and they looked for matches of anyone diagnosed since 1976. By law is reported to the State Cancer Registry. So that was the linkage that we did. And again, that's the method that was used in the Daniel study and in the World Trade Center study. We all use the same method to identify. We don't ask the firefighters themselves to report their health history or any other way of determining it. It's all this standard methodologic way of doing it with the Cancer Registry linkage. And again, through 2018, we're doing our updated analyses, but in this cohort, we did identify over 1,000 cancers, first primary cancers. And we only looked at the first cancer diagnosed and reported to the registry. We will be looking at firefighters who had multiple cancers down the line. Most of the studies, the Lee study from Florida looked at first primary. The Daniels pooled cohort looked at multiple primary. So we're going to do it both ways. But this is first primary, so the first cancer ever diagnosed. And it was a total percentage of 7.1% of the firefighters. And again, I'm sorry I keep doing that. I need to do this. The percentage among the men firefighters was almost twice as high as among the women. And there's some reasons we'll talk about in a minute. This is a distribution, and again, not unlike the data we saw this morning. I did a back of the napkin calculation on Dr. Prezant's data. In New York State, 25% of the cancers diagnosed in men are prostate cancer. In our study for the prostate, testes, and others combined, it was about 30%, but the vast majority of those were, I think 0.3 was probably testes and other, and 30% were prostate cancers. In the Prezant study in New York firefighters, it was about 40%. So not out of line. Again, these are common cancers in the population, but this is the order in which we diagnosed them. And then among the women, the most common cancers were female breast, melanoma, and female genital system. But again, small numbers, unfortunately, even with a fairly nice sized group of women, 11% of the population, still small numbers. A little busy slide. This is more for the epidemiologists. We like to compare to other studies, other recently conducted studies using the same methodology to see how our population compared. This is the GLASS study that I mentioned in Australia, a very, very large study because they register and certify volunteer firefighters the same as career firefighters. They have a central registry, a known ID number. They follow them through their career, so they're able to do very good studies. So our firefighters entered the cohort, fairly young. We had a long follow-up period, which may mean we have a lot, more older firefighters than some of the other studies. So we had, slightly higher percentages of cancer, but the male to female ratio was pretty consistent across studies, except for the Daniel study. They also as I said, included multiple cancers in their population, first and multiple primaries. It was all urban firefighters, 3 cities. So there are some reasons why their ratio and the time period too, they didn't have
many females in their study as a proportion. So, several reasons we think that might be occurring, but we're pretty comparable to some of the more recent studies in career firefighters and volunteers, which is reassuring. So I don't know, do you want to take over at this point, or I can just keep going? You'll do the, yeah, okay, great. So I already mentioned this, but pretty much for female firefighters, the most common cancers are breast cancer, any female genital or melanoma. For male firefighters, again, the site-specific cancer proportions were highest for prostate, lung and bronchus, melanoma, colon, bladder. And these sites are similar to the proportions seen in other firefighter studies, including the pooled cohort studies and the meta-analyses, leading us to, as Jackie mentioned, we want to look at subgroups to see if there are differences that we need to know about in terms of targeting. Not surprisingly, the biggest risk factor for cancer is age. So we're not surprised that our firefighters with cancer were significantly more likely to be older. The average age of diagnosis was older in men than women. And interestingly, we did look at the younger firefighters and the rate of prostate cancer in our study, or the proportion of prostate cancers. We didn't look at population-based rates. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The proportion of cancer diagnosed in men under the age of 55 was higher in our population compared to the US population and New York State population. So again, we see, looks like we're getting a signal on prostate cancer that other studies have found as well at earlier ages. And we will investigate that further in our data. I'll skip over this again, comparing to other studies. We're right in range with some of the other cohort studies in terms of the most frequent, with a couple of blips, outliers. In Australia, they had, 37 to 38% of their cancers were prostate. They also, given their geographic location, had more melanomas of the skin. But in general, we believe we're in line with the levels seen in career firefighters. In terms of the distribution of the cancers we're seeing, we still have to do quite a bit of analysis. Okay, I'll switch to Jackie. We're continuing our analysis in terms of looking at the impact of age, geographic region, fire service details to the extent that we can. And that's the data we'll be publishing, the standardized incidence rates compared to the general population and perhaps to career firefighters.
Wrong slide. Urinary system, bladder cancer. Oh, I'm not close enough to the mic. Sorry, people watching us. This one's 10% of all cancers in the US, or proportional, are not urinary tract, renal, or bladder. And I think that's related to it's a known side effect of many of the carcinogens that are encountered in firefighting. It's just something that popped out at me that I just wanted to highlight, which is you do begin to see signals of certain cancers that luckily bladder cancer is easily treatable, and kidney cancer, if you catch it early, is very readily treatable. So the conclusions from this study is that the all-volunteer firefighter cancer rates are consistent with the other studies of career firefighters. And really, it highlights the importance of continuing surveillance for all firefighters, regardless of career, volunteer, mixed. And again, strengthen the prevention, mitigation methods, and post-fire contamination. And that the target cancers that were most frequent, the prostate, lung, melanoma, colon, bladder, and breast and female genital and melanoma in women can be detected through regular screening and identified when treatment is most effective. And that's really the goal of many of these screenings, which is to not just find something and say, oh, we found it, can't do anything for you, but to find it so that we can intervene. We learned a lot of lessons, and we've heard a lot about it yesterday when they were talking about getting the numbers. And, there's a lot of money the federal government has for the cohort or the registry, and they don't have a lot of people that have signed up yet. I mean, there are techniques that maybe they could work with the the states all have the listings. Why can't the state give to the feds and then, bypass it so that they can actually get a listing of who's in the cancer registries? And when someone signs a consent, just drop them into the database. So there are ways of getting it. So hopefully they'll get the 100,000 people they're trying to get. One of the challenges we had is there was the missing contact information. We found there's a turnover in chiefs, and we may have had a chief that was very excited about participating, and then the elections come and they got booted out of office, and then the next chief was not interested. Chain of command and the variations in record keeping, and a reluctance to release members' information. And also, people were actually concerned about how departments who participated may have differed from non-participants. There are ways that we can look and see on the data that we can get from non-participants if they're the same or different. And if there was selection bias that may affect what made one particular company participate versus another one who didn't. And then other studies, we weren't able to ask things like tobacco use or family history or other jobs. That's why we're comparing them to the general population, because figuring that people who are volunteers are working in jobs similar to that in the community, so that shouldn't be that different. And with that, we're going to conclude. And I think, are we taking questions at the end of the session, or do we have time for questions now? I'm happy to entertain a couple questions. I'm not sure what we're doing with questions, or if there are questions that someone posted from the ether.
No, there are any questions.
Cool.
Yeah, this slide, I mean, it does say it all. We thank the firefighters. I should have just reiterated that the cooperation, even if they couldn't give us the records, they believed in the study, and they, really did support us. And if they were reluctant, again, to acknowledge the risk, they said, but I want to do this for the future generations. We want to change the culture for the young guys and for our families. And we definitely felt that from them. So we acknowledge their appreciation. It's hard to do these boring data collection exercises when you have a million other things, fundraising, as well as training, and the things they have to do as volunteers. So we enjoyed the study. We continue to work with them, and we look forward to future studies.
Yeah, and again, if we can highlight what areas and learn from this and how we can target prevention.
Right. Ken Fent and Miriam Siegel reached out to us at the beginning. They heard we were doing this. We were dumb enough to be, taking on the volunteer fire service. Not dumb, just, brave enough to do it, because it's difficult. They asked us, we gave them all our study materials, our recruitment strategies, and advised them to, go for companies or state training academies and things that have good lists of the information they will need. Yeah.
You talked about access to the registry. I'm just making sure you're aware that Dr. David Lee was the director of the state Florida Cancer Registry, and he may have some great guidance on, and maybe you already did work with him on how you might do that nationally.
We've talked to David, and we hope that we can work out a linkage to the Florida registry, because we know at least 150 to 170 of our firefighters are living currently in Florida. So we're going to hopefully work that out with approvals. Great suggestion.
Great. We have a couple of questions coming in. One of them, Jennifer says, thank you for the presentation. Is there any way to estimate the bias that comes from departments/individuals being more likely to sign up for the study if they had a cancer diagnosis? Or, for example, have several members with a cancer diagnosis?
It's a great question. I think that because cancer is so pervasive, that the likelihood of that bias occurring, because we did it, people were not signed up as individuals. People were signed up as companies. And I would argue that virtually every company in New York State has been affected by a member or retired members who have had cancers. So while that is an absolutely wonderful question, I don't think it's going to be necessarily will skew our data. I mean, interestingly, we did have a number of folks who were very involved in advocacy groups for firefighters with cancer, who would go out and help us with outreach for the cancer study. And it was their effort to say, hey, this happened to me. I don't want it to happen to you and to your company. Let's get the data and find out what we can do for prevention.
Marcia had a question. Why did you not include job and lifestyle issues?
Again, the data were collected on the, from the company level. So the database that the fire service had, and they didn't have necessarily records of their other jobs or their lifestyle habits because they don't collect that personal information on folks. Ideally, we would have had that, but we weren't asking on an individual basis. The data presented to us, while it gave us the names of individuals, was on a company basis or on a fire department or district basis.
The only question we did ask is, have you ever been a career firefighter? So we do have that for companies that collect that information.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, it's been a little bit hectic trying to get these things figured out here. All right, for those of you attending, I just want to make sure you're in the right room. This is Structural Firefighting Track C. The presenters today will be Sam Eden and Gina Hudson. It is on structural firefighting and decontamination practices, career and volunteer. This presentation demonstrates proper techniques for both doffing and decontaminating bunker gear and equipment after structural firefighting to limit cross-contamination and exposure. To give you a little bit of bio on both our presenters today, we have Sam Eden. Sam Eden began his career 33 years ago in EMS and 26 years ago as a career firefighter. He came into the fire service as a paramedic with a background as a training captain with an EMS provider. He's also served as a fire officer for 20 years in the ranks of lieutenant, captain, EMS captain, and for the past 10 years as an operations battalion chief for Palm Beach County. And just to add to that, Sam was also the health and safety chief for Palm Beach County Fire Rescue just before he retired. Gina Hudson started her career as a firefighter paramedic in 1998 with the city of Miramar Fire Rescue. Over her 22-year career, on top of her firefighter paramedic duties, Gina also held positions in community education and community outreach, as well as public information officer. Gina first became involved with a state FACE team, which is our cancer firefighters attacking cancer epidemic team, after her husband, also a firefighter with Davey, was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. After his cancer was successfully treated, Gina took on a bigger role with our collaborative to now help others in the fight. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Sam Eden and Gina Hudson. Sorry, Gina.
Just making sure my wallet's up here. Good afternoon. Yes, I am retired now. I was a little bit older, but I'm really honored to be standing here today on an international cancer symposium, because that's what really this is, and to look at departments from all over the United States here, you know, Arizona, California, clearly departments I'm working with currently are in this room from the state of Florida, and of course, Boston in the back here. Should be intimidating, but the topic is something we all appreciate as being the one thing that we can do right now to start to attack that cancer issue. something as simple as a bucket. So we're gonna start with a video. This is our more recent credentials up here. I'm really happy to be working with Gina. She came on strong recently with the collaborative. We are from the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative. We work statewide on cancer prevention, mental wellness, responder threat across the board, but we are the co-chairs for the cancer prevention arm of that collaborative. So I'm going to start with the video and really the why. And I only have 30 minutes to do this, and I'm a little nervous about that, so go with it.
Dispatch to firefighter Patry. Dispatch to firefighter Eric Patry. Firefighter Eric Patry has responded to his last alarm. He was the MacGyver of the fire department. Beyond that, Eric was everyone's friend. He was always there for anyone that needed help, regardless of the situation. Family, friends, and fellow firefighters, Eric has responded to his last alarm. Rest in peace, Eric. Rest in peace.
Each of us knows a firefighter who's fought, is fighting, or has lost their battle with cancer. Cancer affects us all. Many of you suspect firefighters may be at greater risk.
Today, we have an opportunity to find out if that is true, and more importantly, why.
A major research project is underway. It's being conducted by a research team at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of Miami. Sylvester is a leader in our region for all things cancer, including groundbreaking research, screening, diagnosis, treatment, survivorship, and prevention. The findings of their study could lead to life-changing improvements in the way we do our job.
Here's what we need from you. 15 minutes. A simple confidential survey is underway right now. This survey, done online, is paramount to identifying how our service relates to cancer risks. After you complete the survey, you may be eligible for free cancer screenings. Again, we cannot stress enough the importance of this survey.
If you're currently an active firefighter, this 15-minute survey could save your life or that of your fellow firefighter.
I hope you will answer the call.
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 We hope you will answer the call.
To get started, click the link below.
Collaboration. That video was put together showing multiple departments working together on the same issue in our area. It was really when we started a campaign to get our firefighters to start filling out surveys. And the campaign was successful statewide. One of the things we did with our video was kind of what Boston talked about yesterday. You've got to get labor involved in the message. In that video, our president of the local 2928 was actually featured in that, along with the chiefs that you saw there. And the importance of that was labor and management working together on the same issue, but also departments like you're seeing right here working together on the same issue. Imagine the strength and the power of having all those locked arms with a single solitary purpose to fight cancer. Such a big deal. And I'm proud of that video, but I'm proud of what I'm seeing today in the fire service in this National Cancer Symposium. It's much like what that video shows. Do I have a clicker or do I just go next slide? Okay, so is this just button right here? That's it. So the why. If we don't paint the why in the fire service, we can throw equipment, we can throw procedures, we can throw everything, all the money at this process. If I don't create a why for my people that I'm working with, I'm going to lose the message. Boston did an amazing job with Faces of Fire. Face is an important thing because it puts a face to the issue. There are people in this room that are currently fighting cancer. There's nothing more important than the why. It is the single motivator, if you can capture that for your people, to get them to, at 2 o'clock in the morning, to think I've got to clean up. This is a quick example from a slide from the FCSN. I'm going to get to this as well, but the slide up here shows what our biggest nemesis is and how micro small it is. This is part of that why I'm talking about here. On this helmet are 20 firefighters from around the state of Florida that have lost their life to cancer, a sprinkling of those that have lost. Some fire investigators, driver operators, captains, battalion chiefs are on this helmet. This helmet walked the state with a guy named the Bull, Tom Bull Hill, from Key West to Tallahassee. We walked in to talk to our legislators about the issue. This, and I'm going to pass this around, and I asked Gina to take this back to the camera, is a representation of just my department, Palm Beach County Fire Rescue. 30 members, 2 in the last 3 months, guys that I worked with, 90% on here I worked with, now gone to cancer. Their faces, their voices, now muffled and silenced. What would they say to us today? And what would they say when they see the kind of effort that's being put into fixing this issue? I think they'd be pretty proud about it. But they'd also talk to our young firefighters about the importance, and our legacy, our leaders, about the importance of pushing this message forward. In my own department, if you haven't done this in your departments, if you haven't looked at the numbers like Miami-Dade did, they're like 150 at this point on their band. And imagine that the impact when you see the name after name after name of the people that you worked with, just like Boston did with their video. I don't even know those guys, but it still punches you in the gut to see the impact that cancer's had on us. This is a visual for your people. So try to do this in some form or fashion to make sure that that impact is there when you're trying to talk about what we're dealing with. This slide is a representation of what we're dealing with in our nemesis. It shows how small the particulate is. This is a hair follicle. The tan things there are beach sand. If you can't read this, these blue areas are pollen, the size of the pollen, hair follicle pollen. In that pink area, this small section here is what we're talking about in heavy metals. And it's why it's not what you see, but it's what's not there that's killing us. And it's why decontamination processes are labeled a reduction process. We can't get away from that, much like we can't get away from the dangers that the fire service presents. That is always going to be there, but we can reduce it, can we not? And through the studies we've heard, with 85%, with a simple process like this, and soap and decon, we're able to reduce that to 85%.
We talk about the why. Now we're going to talk about the what and the who. All of you here in attendance over the last couple of days have seen these green buckets. Here is our green bucket. This is one of our #1 easiest, most effective ways to fight this fight. 2018, the Florida State Legislature, with the support of our CFO and State Fire Marshal Jimmy Petronas, allocated $1 million grant to make this happen. It was a feat done with the goal of having one of these buckets on every truck in the state, along with every fire academy and every training site. To date, we've had over 4,700 of these buckets put out. This was a massive undertaking. It involved hundreds of hours of volunteering, planning, getting people together, both in the fire service and private sector as well, supporting it. This was the brainchild of, again, the Jimmy Petronas' State Marshal Office, Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, along with the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative and the Firefighter Cancer Support Network. They got together, they sat down and brainstormed. This bucket was the brainchild of that brainstorming. Very simple, but very effective. And we know how firefighters are. Let's keep it simple. This bucket, which we're going to go over in a second, wasn't only those 4 organizations. It was multiple organizations that have the backing and the support of it. Along with those 4, you have the Florida Professional Firefighters, the International Association of Firefighters, the Florida Fire Chiefs Association. So from the top down, we've had support across the board, along with 10-8, who not only won the bid to help support and supply this equipment to us, but volunteered their time to help us assemble and distribute these buckets. What we're going to do now is we're going to give you a sample, an example of how the actual system works, and it's very simple. Let me get my volunteer in here.
That's gonna be after this.
Oh, you want to do the video? Okay, we're going to do the video first, and then we're going to do a walkthrough.
Okay, so this, let me set this video up really quickly. We are gonna bring somebody in to do the demonstration at the end here, because it's gonna be, we'll go through that in a minute, but I want to, this video was set up with the collaboration, assistance, and a partnership with University of Miami, at Miami-Dade, and the departments that you see there are listed, several of them, Hialeah, Davie, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach County Fire Rescue, City of Miami, got together to provide this. And one of the questions we have a lot is the safetiness of letting a firefighter down and potentially having that firefighter go back with wet gear and go back into the fire. I'll just throw this out to you. I don't think we'd have a firefighter arguing that they couldn't go into the fire just because they got rained on. And that's basically what we're talking about here. We're wetting the outside of the gear. Nobody's going to say, I can't take the fire. I can't go to that fire chief. I just got rained on. So that's not going to happen. But bottom line, wet gear, that was a common thought process. So we went ahead and addressed that through this video.
Fire departments across the state of Florida are taking remarkable steps to save lives. Today, after every fire, you're decontaminating your gear. This process, created in collaboration with the Firefighter Cancer Initiative at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, is reducing the harmful carcinogens on your gear by 85%. While you are doing this to be safe, you may have questions about new risks this process may present.
Let's first talk about the process of getting your gear wet. Your bunker gear is made so that water cannot penetrate or reach your skin. There are 3 layers: an outer shell, a thermal barrier, and a moisture barrier. Together, the 3 layers work to keep water during the decon from reaching your skin. As long as you follow proper decon procedure, there will be no risk for steam burn.
To illustrate this point, here's a group of firefighters that have just gone through a fire simulation. Now, they're going to go through the decon process. It is important to note that you're washing only the exterior of your gear. You want to take proper steps to ensure water does not get on the inside of the lining. Once the decon process is complete, instead of sending the firefighters to rehab, we're going to send them back into a fire simulation. And they will be wearing the gear that is still wet from the decon process. Once in the simulation, their bunker gear is exposed to extreme temperatures for several minutes. Upon exiting, the firefighters are checked, and because they followed the recommended decontamination process, there are no signs of steam burns or other injuries.
Bunker gear dry can weigh as much as 45 pounds. You may have concerns about how much your gear will weigh after soap and water is added. The good news is it's minimal. As an example, this firefighter fully packed out weighs 304 pounds. Now we're going to put him through a thorough decon process. After completing the process with plenty of soap and water, he steps back on the scale at 308 pounds. The difference between dry and wet bunker gear is about 3 to 4 pounds.
When it comes to drying your gear, drying times can vary. Therefore, once you've completed the decon process, you want to bag your gear, and once back at the fire station, you want to hang up your coat and pants to dry. Never place it in direct sunlight. Newer gear, on average, takes as little as 10 minutes to dry. Older gear may take an hour or more. Much of this has to do with the ever-improving technology in our equipment.
Remember, even if you just wrapped up the decon process, you could still re-enter a fire with bunker gear.
The water weight from decon has little impact on the total weight of the bunker gear.
And dry time, it can take as little as 10 minutes up to an hour, depending on the age of the gear.
Regardless, wet or dry, it can still be used on a call.
And don't forget the importance of showering within the hour.
These decontamination processes are reducing our exposures to harmful carcinogens. Together, we're making the fire service safer.
Please note that in that video and every one that we've done with Sylvester, labor was there, and that we had 2 locals actually involved in that. Again, message is important. We have to make sure that the personnel that are hearing the message know that this is a cooperative effort. Back to the PowerPoint. So this is a very fast class. We give this course, it's a 4-hour course. for firefighters and their departments. But this overview just gives a simple look at a fire scene and a new thought process, if you will, about creating a decontamination line from the hot zone somewhere in the warm zone area, so that when you're coming out of the fire, you're actually moving away from the contaminants. The black boxes are things that we've always been doing. We've always doffed our gear. We've always gone to rehab. We have that process in place. The green is something new that I added this. So obviously a decontamination process before they hit the doffing area. They want to wet that gear down. And when all possible, staying on air instead of getting back to that thought process where you have to take, clipping your air off. If you're going to rehab or you're going to take a knee because you've gone through 2 bottles, at that point, you're going to keep your air on while you go through the decon process. If you know you're going back into the fire, obviously, you have to make a communication. That's not a problem. But if you know you're going to take a knee or you're going to rehab, we're asking our firefighters to stay on air until they get to the doffing process. After doffing, they're going to wipe, rehab, and then of course, before we leave the scene, we have always kind of put our gear back on the truck. Instead of putting it on dirty, we're going to make sure there's a good thorough cleaning of that gear before it gets on, or it's encapsulated. If you don't have clean cab, a way to create that clean cab environment is to encapsulate and or clean very well before that stuff goes back on the truck. Just something important. I want to thank Osceola County Fire Rescue for responding to a need today. So I'm going to ask them, thank you, Bert Vergara. He's a lieutenant for Osceola, one of our partners in the collaboration also. And we were able to get a real firefighter, not that we're not all real firefighters, to come and be part of our decontamination process. While they're coming in, this timeline here, obviously, after they're leaving the scene, getting back is obviously showering within the hour and making sure that you don't bring your dirty clothing back to your own home and your own washing machine to clean that along with your family stuff. So cleaning your stuff up before you leave the station and not bringing it back to your house and then your home. So what we're going to do is walk through. I'm going to ask our president for the collaborative, Chris Bader, to come up and assist Gina Hudson through the process. And I'll basically do a narration of what we're doing. Hi, thank you very much. How are you? Awesome. You got picked, huh? Little hand of round of applause. Again, thank you, Osceola County, for coming in. Obviously, what's your name, brother or sister? Huh? I couldn't tell. Stephen. Okay. All right. Gotcha. So let's talk about the components of the decon process. The bucket is very similar to probably the bucket that you guys work with, of course, but very simple stuff. Why are we using a green hose line and a green cone? Obviously, with a green cone, you have something visible that's not normal on a fire ground. So when a firefighter's coming out of the hot zone and they know they're going to decon, they're visually looking for something like that. And these things actually light up as well for nighttime. So they'll know that it's something different. It's not an orange cone, it's a green cone. They know where they're going. The green hose line is very visible for us also. It represents what we're doing for decontamination. So if those things are going out on social media and somebody shows that, it's a messaging for all of us. Hey, that department's doing decon, that department's doing decon, that department's doing decon. So it's a very obvious thing. Also in the bucket was a 2.5 to garden hose reducer. 2 of them. Director House is the back. Stand up, sir. Very instrumental in making this happen. I'll give him a round of applause, actually. He's in the State Fire Marshal's office. And when we started talking about making just one hose line and one 2.5 reducer, said, listen, let's make sure there's enough in case you blow a line, or in case you want to put a second line in place. Each of those buckets that goes to every water pumping apparatus in the state of Florida is going to have 2 options for decon if everything's working great. Why not a hose line? Why not an 1 3/4 or a booster line? Harder to control, and you don't need that much flow. Heavier pressures push these contaminants farther into and embed them into the actual fibers of the gear. So a garden hose line is all you need on like a shower mode. It's not more pressure, the better. In this situation, it's a flowing action that you want. You don't need a lot of pressure either. 70 PSI will work perfectly for this. So coming off a discharge, anything over 70 PSI is not necessary, but these hose lines are actually really good key hose line. And they'll be able to handle any kind of a water hammer or high pressure that might go through them, but all you need is 70 PSI. So the process, like we talked about here, is that she's going to go, the firefighters come out, they're on air, they're still, you don't have to go on air, but they'd have their regulator in place. They would decon each other. There's not going to be somebody like Gina sitting waiting for her. they're going to do this as a team. They're both contaminated, so therefore they're working as a crew to decon themselves. So consider Gina fully packed out. As she goes through the process, she's starting at the neckline down to get it. First thing we're going to do, complete rinse to wet with just water, and then once she's done all that, she'll pick up the bucket, the soapy sudsy solution with the brush, and there it is. Thank you. Captain Bader or Chief? Is it Chief Bader now? Oh boy, I just demoted you. Obviously, the sudsy solution, when I emulsify, it takes that 40% to that 85% completely saturated and sudsing the firefighter up head to toe. Obviously, we're not going to demonstrate it here. We asked if we could bring a hose line in here. They told us no. So anyway, neckline down. The importance of this is this. Obviously, if I start hitting that neckline or that face area, the water that's hitting the neck is going to go where? It's going to go into the coat and inside. Now we're going to have maybe even water all the way down into the boots. We're not doing that. It's all exterior, and that's what the gear is designed to do. The helmet and the mask and stuff will be handled later. Once that firefighter is completely sudsed up and then rinsed off, that firefighter now will turn to the other firefighter and start that process with them as well. This is how we cut the line of contamination on the fireground. It's a simple process. Does it take a little longer? Yes. Would your fire scenes run a little longer? Yes. Why? You're doing this for the health and safety of your firefighters and making sure we're not cross-contaminating the fireground into our fire apparatus and then therefore bringing it back to the fire station. So that's the importance of that. Once they've gone through that full decon process, they're going to start to doff their gear. So firefighter, what is it, Stevens? Or my friend, go ahead and doff your gear. We'll bring a chair up here. Thanks, Chris. We'll grab a chair. I said, when I said you're going to help, yeah, sorry. You're nervous? All right. So, okay. So when we're doing this, remember that we haven't wet anything on the top area. We haven't touched the helmet. We haven't touched the hood. And as you start to take this hood off, I want you to be mindful of something. So go ahead and take your mask off. You're doffing the mask. The hood is relatively dry, maybe a little perspirations made it wet, but it's got a lot of particulate. It's not been washed yet. We're asking in our process to make sure, no wiping yet. We're gonna go ahead and you're gonna doff your stuff. All right. And as he goes to take off his hood, we tell the firefighter, hold your breath. That hood is dry. It's probably holding a lot of particulate at that point. As you pull it over your head, holding your breath and maybe having the wind at your back allows that to not actually go inside your respiratory tract. Just another step. Every little thing matters here. As the gear comes off, if you watch some of Gavin Horn's videos about taking gloves off, that's also an important process too. So if you get a chance to look at some of the videos that Gavin Horn's put together on doffing, it's important because you can actually reduce your exposure to that as well. All the stuff would go into a certain area, a doff area away from rehab, and rehab might be over here, but we're gonna just kind of keep it concise and tight to this one section. On the fire ground, we can't have firefighters walking around so go ahead and stop right there. Leave your pants on. We stop here. Why? Okay, the gear's been rinsed. It's been sudsed up. It's been sudsed up and rinsed. It's 85% better on the outside, not necessarily inside. But we can't have you walking around in bare feet and socks or socks on a fire ground, so the pants stay intact here. At this point, we would start the wiping process. So we've doffed the gear, we got to wipe, and just from a standpoint of wiping, I'm just going to tell you don't have to. You can follow me if you want to. But where would the first place that you'd want to wipe in this scenario? Good question, huh? Your hands, right? You're going to use these hands to clean the rest of your body. The very first thing you're going to do is make sure you do a thorough wiping of your hands and your wrists because a lot of that exposure could be in that area as well. Make sure that's cleaned down. And once you've gone from that, the next biggest area, very good, my brother, David, neck. Now, if you've seen some of the videos from the fast test, you've seen how heavy that particulate can grow in this area, especially if it's a single layer hood and not if it's not a particulate blocking hood. So when you do this, you're not using the same wipe that you use to wipe your hands. You're actually going to move another set of wipes to do your neck. And you're not going to take those wipes and use those same wipes to move into your face and your more vulnerable areas. As you move through these positions, these areas, you want to make sure you don't cross-contaminate the heavier areas into the more vulnerable areas, if you will. So hands by themselves, neck by itself, and then from there, your face and your head. And you're sweating. just like I am. It's on there. Exactly. All right, and then of course, we got wipes are cheap, so use a lot of them. And then after you've got done with all of that, the last thing we just say is maybe just use a single one for your eyes. So as you're coming into that area, think about where that mask was. And the mask, I'm talking to the firefighters at this point, this area is pretty well contained. It's got the mask, you've got the seal there. So don't take that same wipe that's up here and start bringing it into here. We don't want to do that. We want to keep this, the last thing that we do in this area, and clean it very well. And now he would sit down. If you were at this point, you would take your pants down to your ankles. This might be the position for rehab. So we'll take this to clear the seat for him, and he'd sit down. And we're doing this to get the gear away from the groin. And we're also doing it to cool off. If he has to get redeployed, his boots are there. He can pull them back up from there. So we're going to go ahead and go to demobilization, but he would have his pants on at this point. He could just jump into them if he wanted to like that. But most of the time in our scenario, we just have them down around the ankles, ready to go. You could still wipe up and clean up inside of rehab at this point, but here's a firefighter in rehab, chilling out, but this gear would not be assembled around it. Where would this gear be? Would be in the drop zone. It would not be in rehab, but we don't have the luxury of spreading this out because we'll be in front of the diagram here. So in that position, if you got called back up for a reassignment, you put your gear back on, go back into the thing. And would we go back through this process again? Absolutely. You've walked into a home that's off gassing still. You may have to go do some overhaul. If you come back out, you go through the same process. It's not the heat and the fire that's causing this. It's the chemical laden environment that you're walking into that requires this to be done. And that's how we'd handle that scenario. So he's being removed, or he's been demobilized, and you're gearing up to get back to your unit. And now, 1 second, don't put him back on. So he would have his, if we do this correctly, he'd have your boots with you. And we're gonna pull that bag from behind there. Gina, thank you, Chris. Chris, come on over for me. Come on up, buddy. There you go. Your back hurt? Bert? No, you're gonna leave her out to dry? All right. So, brother, they'll go ahead and handle this part of it so we get through it efficiently here. All right. So we've got a bag. We chose a 6 mil bag because it's heavy. If you use it, we tried a 4 mil actually, by the way, in the helmet actually pierced through the skin of it. So yanking a bag up really quickly, we wanted something that was going to hold that. So 6 mil bag is what we use. They're a little more cumbersome as far as getting them inside the bucket. We can seven of them inside of there with no problem. And then, so when the first thing that goes into the bag, what do you think it would be? What would it be? Okay, no. How about your gloves? All right, dirtiest thing on the fire ground. If you're not doing glove swap, bottom of the barrel, gloves. Why? There's a reason for this. Next thought process, next thing that goes in, coat. Why? Because I want the pants on top. If I have to take this gear and put it inside of a fire engine and I'm responding back to my station or going back to my station and we get a hit, I want the first thing that firefighter opens up to the boots. So it's on the top. So boots now go in. And then if your helmet's going to get cleaned independently, but this stuff is all getting encapsulated. If I wash it and it's 85% clean, where is it actually 85% clean? The outside. Thank you, Captain Choose up front here. The outside is 85% clean. We've not touched the inside of this gear. So there's still contaminants in this process. So we're going to make sure that this process is done. We use the duct tape to actually gooseneck the top of this bag. And that's how the process, this stuff is now transported back to the station in that encapsulated case. So let's go ahead and go through really quickly the other things that are going to be washed on the scene. So you've got that all set up, duct tapes up. So we've duct taped up. In our system, we're in Palm Beach County Fire Rescue System. We do glove swap and hood swap. So the hood would be swapped out. So we just set it over to the side. And Gina's just gonna hold up the components that are gonna be scrubbed on scene. We scrubbed some of this with the firefighter on it, but before it goes back into the truck, the driver operator is gonna make sure that these 3 packs, these 4 packs, however many packs you have on your truck, are thoroughly cleaned up before they get put back into the truck. If you have clean cab, they'd be put in their their holsters in the outside cabinets. But bottom line is this gear doesn't go back on the truck until it's gone through a thorough additional cleaning with soap and water prior to departure. Also, the helmet's not, the helmet's going to be wiped on the inside, not rinsed on the inside. So we can fully wiped on the inside with wipes, but the outside is going to be scrubbed with soap and water as well. So I didn't see his helmet there. So, and then the mask. The mask is obviously cleaned as per procedures. So all that gear is now cleaned. This adds an opportunity for us to greatly reduce the contaminants that are on the fire ground from actually going back onto the truck. It also puts us in a scenario, and this is the direction not everybody has clean cab. So some people are putting equipment back in. So now we have a consistent process. But what this does for us right here, and that's good. Thank you so much. And I want to appreciate Osceola County. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. Here's the thing. This is Decon 101, or this is Cancer Prevention 101. Why is that? This affects this is culture meeting science. It really is. It happens on every fire scene. It needs to happen on every fire scene. Chief Schmidt's dealing with a scenario where they're bringing gear to the fire scene and actually swapping it out there. Fantastic model that Pasco County Fire Rescue has, which is mirroring Vancouver and also San Antonio's models. But that's logistically bringing that gear there and swapping everything out and not having those firefighters go back with the gear that was contaminated. That's their model. None of us are there yet. This challenges every firefighter. Even with a second set of gear sitting back at the station, this has to be done. If we don't make this kind of a change at the fire scene, we're going to continue to trap those contaminants from the fire ground to the fire apparatus, back to the firehouse, and it goes on from there. This cuts that line. If you have a medical or a rescue in your station, not a heavy rescue, but a regular medical or an ambulance, if you will, in your firehouse, I'm sure you've heard them go out of service for decontamination after an EMS call. This is the same type of thought process. They are committed to the call still, but they're on scene a little bit longer to make sure that this process takes place. And then of course, from there on, they're as a biological human being, what's the next thing? I've got to make sure I get my shower and get cleaned up. The longer that stuff stays inside on our skin, the more that it's absorbed into it. So clearly those urgencies have to start from the scene. It takes leadership to do that. If you're a leader in this conference, if you're here from your department to bring information back to them, this is where you start to cut the line of cancer issues in the fire service, because it's going to be instilled in everybody at that fire ground to make sure it gets done. And the more leadership and the more people, that's informal leaders too, that can make this happen on a fire ground for your people, the final impact will be less and less firefighters getting cancer. You can't deny the impact that cancers have on it. You can see us here from places from all over the nation, and also watching from all over the world about how important it is. And this is 101 to the thought process. Throwing equipment, money, procedures in a fire scene. If you don't get to this point, this is really where those firefighters begin to understand how important it is to start with me. It's a personal thing, keeping it personal. So anyway, that's our presentation, as quick as it would be. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them with Gina. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. Richard says, agreed, PPE decontamination is important in reducing firefighter exposure to contaminants found in smoke. Please address the issue of PFAS saturated in the turnout gear. Does decontamination remove the PFAS from turnout gear?
I don't have the answer to that, but my first answer would be no. I don't believe it removes the PFAS, no.
Okay.
So if anybody in the room thinks that the decontamination process would remove PFAS from the gear, please raise your hand. I don't believe so. Okay.
All right, thank you. The next question is, how important is it to have 2 sets of PPE for firefighters? How does this mitigate carcinogenic exposure? Should this be an NFPA standard?
I believe what should be an NFPA standard, honestly, to that question, the last part of it is absolutely a firefighter either has a second set of gear or an option to get into his clean gear right after a fire. We should not be putting our firefighters back into gear that was just recently exposed, much like we wouldn't put them back in a t-shirt after an EMS call that has bloodborne pathogen on it. You're not going to have them re-put that back on. We shouldn't be having people put dirty, contaminated gear back on their bodies. Second set of gear is important. I think it's certainly a standard that we should be looking towards. I believe there should be an ability to get grant funding to make that happen. I think a better model is what Chief Schmidt's working on here, where you're buying less gear. You're not having to buy a second set of gear for everybody, but you're mobilizing it, making sure a firefighter has an option for a second, a third, and a fourth set of gear in a single shift, because that gear is being mobilized and being brought to the scene, and that's a better model.
Great. And one last question. Eliza says, are there specialized industrial or medical level wipes that are recommended?
I don't have any recommendations on wipes. The science on it says that there are, just wipe. And really, at this point, they haven't done any formal study, or if it's been done, it hasn't been released to me that I know. Does anybody know of a study on wipes yet? Has it come out? Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And our wipes in the bucket are just simply Huggies, unscented baby wipes. So it doesn't have to be anything special.
Right. There are some other wipes out there, but you have to do your due diligence and looking at all of that. So Jeff mentioned also aloe and lanolin it's been proven, proven to increase absorption. Okay, so we don't.
Great.
I have a wipe. It's called the Sam Eaton wipe. No, just kidding. Yes, sir.
With this, what you're doing with decon here, would this be instead of using an extractor once you got back to the station, or would you use that also?
That's a great question. This is as much mitigation we can do to keep that fire truck from getting dirty. We're trying to keep that truck from getting dirty. And so, no, it does not take the place of that. We said earlier, it's the exterior of the gear that's actually getting washed, and that's that 85% reduction. And it's one of the areas, it's the heavier area that catches particulate. If I can emulsify that and get it off the gear, you could see the sheets of black that come off the gear right on scene. But what you're not seeing is, or what you're not touching is the interior. And that there's a clear indication that this is not an encapsulated suit. It's porous. We have areas at the cuffs, at the neck, a billowing that occurs where the coat interfaces. And so from that standpoint, that gear on the inside is still dirty. So that's a great question, but yes, extractor washer would still be needed, but this is a way to encapsulate it, not have it off gas inside the cab on the way back to the station. Once they get to the station, open that gear up, hang it up as they normally would, let it air dry. And then of course, if they have the ability to get in the second set of gear, do so and take that gear and put it in an extractor washer. So good question. Chief,
Wait, let me walk back.
Director. How's our time?
Just to mention from the state of Florida perspective, when we got the $1 million grant by one of the senators led the rest of the House and Senate to appropriate $1 million in 2018. And the proviso language just said to mitigate exposure to carcinogens and other cancer-causing chemicals. So we had such a wide spectrum there, and I really want to, they're thanking me. Well, shoot, the money got stuck in the state fire marshal's budget because somebody had to do the pass-through. But rather than just being able to help like maybe 3 or 4 fire departments in the state with a second set of gear, by working with the collaborative and the FACE team and the Firefighter Cancer Support Network, they looked at a lot of best practices, came up with the recommended ingredients and everything in the buckets. And so, and then we put their logos on there with ours on the buckets and everything. And we were able to help 450 fire departments put these on every apparatus that flowed water. And there was no local grant match, but if we would have had to pass the grant through, some departments needed 4 or 5 kits. On Miami-Dade, I think had nearly 200. So rather than having to do 450 sub-recipient agreements to pass the money to all these cities, counties, and districts, we worked with the University of Miami. That's where the collaborative comes in with your local university like this. and they had a lot less regulation than we did. They were able then to order the kits based on the ingredients recommended by the collaborative and ship them through the vendor right to every fire department at no cost to that department. So we helped 450 departments, didn't have to do one grant agreement. There was no local match. And would you believe it, with firefighters, we haven't gotten a complaint in 3 years for what we put in the bucket. The only thing, believe it or not, some have called us and said, oh, we're getting low on wipes or this or that, or Don, can you buy some more ingredients? Well, no, we used the whole $1 million. But anyway, congratulations to the
Yes.
phase team and the collaborative and the U for making this happen. Thank you.
And thanks, sir. Absolutely. I'd just say that I'm really proud of the state of Florida. I believe that we have from a standpoint of that, I don't know, there's another state in the nation that's taken it to that level. And I know it's taken leadership to do that, but look what we did with $1 million and what other departments, other states could do. It clearly just, it doesn't take much. And that's an inexpensive way to get the tools into the hands of people that really want to make sure this happens. It's a little hard for me to put this into 30 minutes. So clearly I wanted to just go ahead and give us a final thing here. This is our state face team. I want you to, if you can take a picture of the next screen, we do a monthly WebEx. I'd love to have everybody here. And if you're tuning in from outside, even if it's outside the nation, we've had Belgium on there, we've had Sweden on there, we've had New Zealand on this call. It's a monthly call that happens every month, and it's nothing exclusive. What we want to do is share the progress as departments are being done. There's many people in this room that sit on that call, and Director Hallis hasn't missed a call in probably 20 months. He's the lead off, he's the bulldog, he's the guy that kicks it off. So I really appreciate the leadership from the state of Florida. I love that the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative has this, but this isn't exclusive to us. This is how we collaborate. And I would love to have Boston on there to talk about where you've taken your model from here. So, it's a quick segment, 5 or 6 minutes from everybody. I have an opportunity to have people on the agenda, but it's a 1-hour call once a month, and we'd love to have you on there. Here's that's the email. If you want to get your, if you want us to send you the invite for this WebEx, we'd love to have you. I think I've gone way past my time. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Well, he said short and sweet, and this is what we have. Our next presenter is Ed Mann, presenting on real world scenarios. Ed Mann is the Deputy Fire Chief at Logan Volunteer. Is it Chief Logan Volunteer?
Chief Logan.
Okay, just clarification. At Chief Logan Volunteer Fire Department, as well as the Director of Training and Education for Providence.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just FYI, I don't know where they got the bio from. I'm the chief now. The chief resigned in the middle of last year, so I got promoted. As small volunteer department, Central Pennsylvania. I also retired as the Pennsylvania State Fire Commissioner in Pennsylvania after serving 4 governors for 14.5 years. In January 2015, I got a telephone call from a young man that said the governor-elect appreciates everything you've done the last 14.5 years, but so I knew what was next. So I went looking for work that year and landed at Providence. So this subject came about 2 years ago at the Alliance meeting in Miami. During the Alliance meeting, there was a lot of talk about all of the things the fire service should be doing to reduce our risk. And not all fire departments are created equal. In Pennsylvania, for example, we have a lot of volunteer fire departments. Some of them don't have enough money to rub 2 nickels together, much less come up with how they're going to buy 2 sets of turnout gear or even an extra flash hood. We have career fire departments in our country that probably have budgets that are worse than some volunteer departments. So the bottom line is not all fire departments can do all of the things that we can do to reduce the risk. So the question was, what do we come up with? And I don't know who coined the phrase good, better, best, but that's what I'm going to try to cover in 30 minutes. Good, better, best. All right, what button did I push wrong? The big one on the top. Okay. Now I did it. I broke your machine. There we go. Well, we had it for a second. All right, the big green. All right. All right, now we're too far in advance. Oops. All right. So look, you've heard it for the last day and a half, and if you've been to any other symposiums, whether they were online or the National Cancer Symposium that was held in Phoenix a few years ago, there's a ton of best practices available. And a lot of times, if you do a simple Google search, you can find them pretty easily. All right. The issue with many departments is going to be money. In some cases, it might even be leadership. The bottom line is doing something is better than doing nothing at all. And the scientific community has proven that to us. And if we don't take advantage of what science has been offering us, shame on us. Shame on the fire service. So it doesn't take any money to do number one. Wear all your PPE all the time, including your SCBA through salvage and overhaul. What money does that cost? Nothing. Provide a second hood. If you can't provide all your people with a second hood, get some second hoods that you can leave at the station to swap out with your more active people. For example, in my volunteer department, I know primarily who's going to make entry for me on nearly every call. Do I need to have a second hood for 40 firefighters? No. If I can have a second hood for 8 or 10 firefighters, I'm still doing better than I was before by nobody having a second hood at all. Use wipes in the neck, jaw, and the arms and the hands. It was demonstrated here. Again, you're reducing the amount of that stuff that's on you significantly by simply using wipes. Here, I guess it was 2 years ago now, I was at a small volunteer department in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I said to him before I left that night, if you don't do anything else, go buy wipes and put them on your rigs. If you don't listen to anything else I say tonight, put some wipes on your rigs. The next morning when I woke up, I turned my cell phone on. When I opened it up, I had pictures of them at a structure fire they went to like at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. When I left that night, they went to Walmart and bought wipes. And they were sending me pictures, being smart about it. Look, we paid attention to you. Using wipes after a fire they went to. Gross on-scene decontamination, or the new buzzword, preliminary exposure reduction. I don't care what you call it. You want to call it PER, call it PER. You want to call it gross decon, I don't care what you call it. Do it. Do it. Don't carry contaminated gear inside the cab of your vehicles, your privately owned vehicles. Back in the day when I was an adjunct instructor at the State Fire Academy in Pennsylvania, I was doing structural burns every weekend in acquired structures. Guess where my turnout gear went after every one of those calls? In the trunk of my car. And it never got washed. I started in March and I didn't finish burning until November. The stuff didn't get washed between March through November. I didn't know any better then. I had no idea then what we know now. And the cross-contamination, there's a video that was put together here in Miami through the university where they did the powder. If you haven't seen the video, it's the invisible powder and the cross-contamination by going through the fire stations and touching stuff. And one of the things they did is they took a soccer ball and they threw a soccer ball back and forth between a firefighter and his young son. Guess what? When they took the ultraviolet light and ran it down the young son, he was covered with the invisible powder from cross-contamination. Shower as soon as possible. Change your clothes as soon as possible. When I think of the times as a volunteer firefighter that I got up at midnight, got home at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, washed my hands and face, maybe brushed my teeth a little bit, took my dirty clothes off and put them at the foot of the bed on the thing that was designed to hold an Afghan, and then crawled into bed with my wife without taking a shower. I have no idea. Knowing what we know today, I have no idea what I may have exposed my wife to, or my kids for that matter. Clean your tools and apparatus, especially after exposures. Limit your exposure to diesel exhaust. Here's one. Develop, implement, and enforce an SOP. It doesn't make any difference whether you write it and it's 50 pages long and you tell the troops, we're going to do this. If they violate it and you don't do anything to correct it, what's the sense in having the SOP? You wasted your time, your energy, and your effort and the tree to print the damn thing. So almost 6 years ago now, when I started harping on this in my own department, I went to Walmart. I had to buy 3 kits. The total cost to buy 3 kits was $78. $78. The plastic container came from Walmart. Everything that's in it came from Walmart. They showed you how to bag the turnout gear up. I don't know if you've heard this story or not, but several years ago at FDIC, a gear manufacturer gave a bunch of instructors to do training. When they were done, they were to bag the gear up. They didn't put it in clear bags. They put it in dark garbage bags. The guy responsible for cleaning up thought it was trash, and 25 or 30 sets of brand new turnout gear got hauled off to a landfill somewhere. So clear bags is what you should consider using. The other advantage in my department, our SOP is if you've hogged your gear up at a structure fire, and I'm fortunate, we don't have but 4 or 5 a year. Okay, I'm not like some of the large metro departments where I'm having 4 or 5 working fires in a 24-hour shift. I might have 4 or 5 a year. The stuff gets bagged up at the scene and taken back to the station. And it gets loaded in the bed of a pickup truck. Now, if I didn't bag it, could you imagine what it would be like if 8 firefighters took all their stuff off and just threw it into the bed of a pickup truck? It would be one awful mess to try to sort out. Whose coat's this? Whose glove does this belong to? So that's another reason to bag it. Wipes. The other part of this is the little sprayer, that little garden hose there is on a reel. It's kind of stainless steel, a little 2.5. The garden hose adapter costs less than 25 bucks. It's carried in the engineer's compartment of the engine. Deconning or PER, whatever you want to call it. This washing machine, you're saying, wait a minute, that's not an extractor. Yeah, you're right. It's not an extractor. But 15 years ago, when I bought that machine for our station, I called a guy who at the time owned Safety Clean. The company in those days, they were the only ones that were clean and protective clothing. I said, do I have to spend all that money on an extractor? No. You buy a front-loaded washing machine that turns at least 1,100 RPM, you will clean the stuff pretty well. Now, can I tell you unequivocally how much stuff that machine removes from it? No, but you can't tell me how much your extractor removes either. And I didn't spend the kind of money you have to spend on it. And that machine's 15 years old. And I have not had any turnout gear get torn apart because we're using something that's not the extractor. Now, if you have the money to buy the extractors, go for it. But if you're a small volunteer department, and I look around the room here and I doubt there are too many people sitting in this room from small volunteer departments. I don't know who's out in the virtual world listening to this, but this is an alternative, which is better than nothing at all. Wait till you see the high-tech drying machine we have. There you go. About 20 bucks. A 3-speed fan with a metal rack and these little hangers up here. I'm afraid to push a button for fear of hitting the wrong one. The hangers are up there or to help kind of keep the turnout clothing, because you take the cuff of the pants and turn them upside down. So those hangers, those metal clips are there to keep them on the hangers so they're not falling on the floor. It takes about 35 to 40 minutes to completely dry the turnout gear with the liners and the shells completely separated. Not a lot of money. Apparatus checks. If you don't have the vehicle exhaust capture systems in your stations and you're going to do apparatus checks, start the rig up and take it out on the ramp. If you have a call and you're waiting, especially in a volunteer station, you know, the tones drop at 6 to 8 minutes before the guys or gals show up at the station. Don't sit in the station and let the thing idle in the apparatus bay. Get it out of the station. Get it out of the station. You're not covering all the stuff inside your apparatus bay. You're not covering your turnout gear. You're not covering everything with soot from the diesel exhaust. Better. Establish red, yellow, or green zones or hot, warm, cold zones in your stations. Don't let dirty stuff out of the apparatus bay. Okay? No bunker gear in the bunk room. No pun intended. All right? I retired from the Air Force as a firefighter. When I look back and think about our gear lockers, along with all of our bed linens were in our lockers, and guess where they were? In the bays directly behind all the crash trucks that had 2 diesel engines in them in most cases. So the bed linen we were using that was in our lockers, every time a vehicle got started, everything in the lockers was being coated with the stuff. Now, granted, look at my hair. I entered the Air Force in 1977 and retired in 94. We didn't know any of this stuff then, but we do now. Quit the use of tobacco, including dip and e-cigarettes. Someone might say, why is that listed better and not as a best practice or at the top of the list? I'm not going to lie to you. I have an addiction to tobacco. Now I'm trying to quit it. But I can tell you it's not easy after 30 plus years of using nicotine to just up and quit. And every time I think I have a handle on it, something goes sideways in my life and it's like, hey, give me a pinch, will you? I got to get through the night. Or maybe I got to smoke a rather large Winston Churchill cigar because I had a lousy week. I'm not going to stand up here and be hypocritical. It's tough to give up some of the habits that we have. Get an annual physical. Some people say, well, I don't have health insurance. Okay. Give up 1 case of beer a month for 12 months and you'll have enough money to at least get a physical. All right?
That's not easy to do,
Okay.
You got your cigarette thing, I got my beer.
Well, that's why I do Irish whiskey and now not beer. And look, I know 2 people who suffered from the same type of cancer. One of them's dead, one of them's alive. Why? Early detection. The guy that died kept blaming the way he was feeling on something else for the better part of a year. The guy that's alive was getting harassed by his wife and said, you're going to the doctor. He's alive. The other guy's dead, and they both had identical cancers. Early detection. As part of this physical, a dermatologist. I went to a dermatologist several years ago. He said, you have a precancerous something on the side of your nose, but it's nothing to worry about. I said, what do you mean it's nothing to worry about? You just said precancerous. And he took this nitrogen or whatever it was and froze this thing off. I think he was a sadist, to be honest with you, because he hit me once. He said, did that? And the snot was running and my eyes were watering. He said, did that hurt? I said, yeah. He said, I'm going to do it again. He went, bam, before I could catch my breath. But he wanted to see me every 6 months. I've had things removed from the side of my face, my ears, my back, and my arms every time I go to him. And he's freezing them off, but it's all quote unquote precancerous. Did it all come from exposure to the fire service? I don't know. Does it matter? No. Cancer is cancer. I don't care how you get it. Fully document all exposures on incident reports and personal exposure reports. And we'll talk about this a little bit. 2 sets of PPE. If you can do it, by all means, do it. In my department, there's no way I can afford to buy 2 sets for everybody. So about 5 years ago, we started to buy 2 or 3 new sets of gear every year. I started with the people at the top of the list who make the most runs that are going to be my interior people. They got a new set. The next year, I bought a couple of more sets. It does a couple of things. One, it's great to get a grant, but if you buy 50 sets of turnout gear at one time, what happens to 50 sets of turnout gears in 10 years? The NFPA says you should replace it all. Well, you know, if I'm in Miami-Dade where I'm running a lot of fire calls, I agree. Maybe it needs to be replaced in 10 years. But if I'm wearing it in central Pennsylvania where someone's seeing 2 or 3 working fires a year, is it absolutely necessary to trash that stuff after 10 years? All I'm saying is a little common sense can go a long way. 2 sets. 2 sets for people that are your most active people. Buy a couple of sets each year instead of trying to buy it all at one time if you're on a limited budget. Alternative to clean cab concept. I don't want to start a debate. I think the clean cabs concept is terrific. If you got the money and you can afford to do it, but there's an alternative to it. Take the stuff out of your apparatus and clean it. Clean the inside of your cab today and don't let dirty stuff back in it. Take the stuff back to the station in a pickup truck or some other way. Clean the inside. So the only thing that's getting back in the cab that's quote unquote contaminated is your firefighter. Clean the seats down when you're done. Okay. But would it be as great as having the clean cab that the apparatus manufacturers offer today? No, but it's better than doing nothing at all. Remove ice machines and water fountains from your apparatus bay. When I went to the symposium in Phoenix, I went back and told our trustees the ice machines in the apparatus bay, which was in a room off the apparatus bay, has to get moved. Why? And then I showed them that picture of where they went through some fire stations where they took ice and put it in a cup and let it melt. And the oil sheen was floating on top of it. I didn't have any more argument from the trustees about moving ice machines. If you can't afford the exhaust systems, here's an alternative. Cover your turnout clothing in the apparatus bays so the soot from the diesel exhaust isn't hitting it all the time. This also may very well help you keep the ultraviolet lights off of it. Okay. Now I got to be honest with you. I stole this picture. Google's a wonderful thing. All right. Google's a wonderful thing. And I can't tell you who actually took the picture, so I can't honestly give them credit for it. Exposure trackers. Again, you want to make sure that you're going to get your hands on something that's been vetted. And it was mentioned today that if you go to the FRCE website, or if you go to the NVFC website, or if you go to a NIOSH website, or you go to the Volunteer Combination Officer section of the International Association of Fire Chiefs and check their websites out, you can find a lot of this stuff that's been vetted by those people. So you don't buy the first thing that sounds good to you to be able to use. And two of them were mentioned yesterday. There's one here through the university, the one through IAFF. And if you do a Google search for them, I'm telling you, you're going to find a bunch of them. Find the one that works for your department and have your people use it. Mass decom, we're going to move into best here, if you will. If you can, and I know here in the Florida area, and I couldn't find the pictures, I know there are a couple of fire departments that have rigs now that were recently delivered to do mass decon at the scene of incidents. Maybe if you can get the money, go for it. Go for it. If you have the people and the money to do it, do it. Again, I just happened to grab this. Google's a wonderful thing. That's where the photo came from. The example of the clean cab, all the SCBAs outside of the cab. This one happens to be in Howard County, Maryland. Again, I got it off of Google. I can't give credit to the person that took the picture because it wasn't listed. The seats that can be easily wiped down. What do you use? Our mechanic loves Simple Green. Okay. Well, Simple Green's nice. The only thing bad about Simple Green is if you use it full strength, it leaves like a sticky residue behind everything. So I would suggest that whatever you use, whether it's a citrus cleaner or whatever, maybe you consider breaking it down a little bit with water before you use it. But do something to keep the stuff clean. HEPA filters installed in fire apparatus. If you ask a fire truck manufacturer today, build me a safe cab and I want 4 HEPA filters in it, I'm sure they'll find a way to put it in there if you got the money. If you have the money. What's an alternative? When you get back from the call, leave the doors open in the apparatus bay and let it air out. PPE stored in a separate ventilated room for protection from UV light. I don't have the footprint in my fire station without putting an addition on to be able to do that. What do we do to protect it from UV light? I had a guy that installs the blackout stuff on car windows come to the firehouse and put it on the windows in the apparatus base so the sunlight cannot get through to the turnout gear that's hanging on the racks in the apparatus bay. Exhaust removal systems. If you get them or can get the money, they're the way to go. All right. If you can't get the money, leave the doors open. Pull the rig out of the station. Years ago, before we got an exhaust removal station in one of our stations, again, a volunteer firehouse, we can be pretty resourceful. We got a huge fan, exhaust fan, and mounted it in the center of the apparatus bay. And then at the front between the apparatus, we put like a 60-minute timer in that when we had a call, you turned the timer on and left. And all the exhaust was being drawn out the back. Now, did I go through scientifically and measure what was in the atmosphere? No. But what we were doing was better than nothing at the time. And we had a Mack water tender at the time. They had an upright exhaust system on it, and it poured black smoke out of it like you were burning coal in it. Was another reason why we put the exhaust system in. Pay attention to your diet. And exercise to stay healthy. Okay. I'm not telling you to exercise to become Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay. Or Charlie Atlas or any of those other folks. Exercise to stay healthy. NFP 1851. If you got all the money in the world and you got all the people in the world and you want to follow the standard, the way the standard's written, 1851's a way to go. Now, and I'll ask this rhetorically, how many of you can afford to do everything that might be listed in 1851? And that's why I kind of go back to good, better, best. doing something's better than nothing. 1585, which is a new standard on infection control. I don't know if it's hit the streets yet or not. I see someone shaking their head no. It's another one that you're going to get to live with going forward. Is another NFPA standard. Again, if you can afford to do everything they want you to do in the standard, by all means do it. If you can't, do something, because something's better than nothing. And the slide you've all been waiting for. There's my contact information if you need anything. So I'll take any questions we might have. Please don't hesitate to email me. I work for an insurance company that insures fire departments and ambulance services. My boss has no problem with me traveling the country to do work on behalf of the company, whether it's delivering training or whatever it might be. So.
Great. Chief Richard has a question, says, thank you, Chief Mann. We can all agree that decontamination is important in reducing firefighter exposure. The issue is our PPE is fluorinated. Is it possible to wear personal protective clothing other than the current PPE for salvage and overhaul?
I'm sure you could use wildland gear that doesn't have the liners and stuff in it. If all you're doing is overhaul. The problem with that is I've been in overhaul situations where you open up on a wall and there's fire there, and the wildland gear is not going to give me the protection. So the safest answer is no, there isn't. That's the only question.
So far, sir.
Come on, Mario, hit me with one.
Guess what the main resistance is today. These things that you suggest, which are all common sense, straightforward, and excellent approaches. What do you think the main resistance to doing this is?
I think some of our folks are still non-believers. Some of our folks are still non-believers, and unless and until one, you can make the message personal to them, or somebody close to them suffers through cancer, whether they survive it or die from it, and then it's kind of like a wake-up call, right? Look, I get a little wrapped up about this firefighter safety stuff. And if you look at my fingers, you can see I'm not the safest person in the world. About just a year ago with a table saw, I cut the tips of two of these off. My point to you is this. As the state fire commissioner, I buried in excess of 100 firefighters from line of duty deaths. Okay. And I discovered when we started to do the Everyone Goes Home program, or the Courage to Be Safe program, that the only way sometimes you could get the message across is you had to make it personal. And when you make it personal, a lot of times people will pay attention, and look, we had a lot of momentum in 2019 with what was going on with firefighter cancer and training and stuff. We lost some of that in 2020. We got to find a way to regain it. All right. We got to get it back out in front of the troops again. So we can do little 4-hour classes like this if we have to, or little 2-hour classes. A plug for the First Responder Center for Excellence. We're doing regional cancer seminars. They're at no cost. And they're like an 8-hour, and you're getting experts from across the country to come in and talk to you about the science, the things you should be doing. And then typically we have a survivor of cancer do a presentation at the end of the day. And we've I don't know how many we canceled in 2020, and we got them rescheduled for 2021, and we've had to cancel 2 or 3 of them already this year. So, and they're free, being paid for from AFG grants. So anything else? Yes, sir.
Just one thing, one of the things that I did, because we haven't had many fire deaths, we're a small career department, 47 members, but if you Google firefighter dies of cancer and you go to the Google News tab, do that for your members, have them look at that, and then you'll see all the firefighters, volunteer and career, that have died over the last couple of years. And I've seen, you know, some of your members and other members who have died, and it just shows you that it's young people, they're dying. And just like I said, have them go to Google News tab, firefighter dies of cancer. You'll see how many are dying each week.
Well, I'm thinking of you ladies from New York, tell Brian McQueen I said hello. I don't know if he's on with his virtual, but tell him I said hello.
I was going to segue off yours. When I give the class, that 4-hour class, part of one of my slides is the IAFF.org. Type in IAFF.org right now. Type in LODD database, and the same thing. You can scroll. Every firefighter that passes from cancer is added to the wall, and that database tells when that firefighter is getting added to the wall. Search only by date on the wall, and you start scrolling, and you'll get a real eye opener about why it's in the 70 and 80 percentile of firefighters being added to the wall that are cancer. And that's, I didn't think about the Google side, but that's another way to do it as well. IAFF.org, IAFF.org.
We're done.
We're done. Great. Thank you very much, Chief. We actually have some additional questions that came through. So this would be actually for you, Chief. Someone asked if you always talk about how you decon. I would say that washing is what actually happens. Would you agree that there's a big difference? And why do you use the term decon?
When we started the process for contaminant reduction, we all know, because of bloodborne, we already relate to that thought process, that name decon. It's something we do all the time. You hear it on the radio, rescues going out of service at a hospital, out of service, decon. So we chose initially the word decontamination when we realized we're really not decontaminating, because you could take a forensic light, CIS, CSI, or whatever light on the back of any ambulance out there right now, and you know that thing's going to light up. It's not going to be fully decontaminated. It's a great question, but I believe we lean towards the word decon because it was so ingrained in the fire service. We'd have to tell somebody else what that meant. We're going to do our best to wash up and clean up afterwards. But yes, it is a washing. It is a contaminant reduction.
Another question that we had is, what suggestions do you have for cold climates where water would be difficult to use?
It's a great question. We did a decontamination class in Ohio and started down the road with them, and we're from Florida, so obviously we don't have the issue of freezing. And I think the question might be better answered by Boston Fire or some of the fire departments are up north, and I'd love to hear their answer to it. But I know that when we went up there, we did network with Ottawa and Chief Peter McBride, and they have a process where there's a certain point, and they somewhere in the, I don't know, 32 degrees or whatever, they're still doing wet decon. But when they get to that threshold, they start to encapsulate. They have one of their departments, they actually get large, like 3M Tyvek suits, and the firefighter can get inside of that, everything, their entire gear and every stuff, and zip that up before they get back into the cab because it's just too cold to do wet decon. Chief?
Being in central Pennsylvania, obviously, when it's 10 degrees out, and an individual just spent 40 minutes in a burn building, you come out and say, okay, I want you to stand over here so I can put water on you and scrub you down. They're not going to be very happy. So what we've done is we have them strip down there, take their turnout clothing off, we bag it up, and they get back on the rig. They're wearing their uniform or whatever clothes they had on underneath it. A lot of our folks are actually taking their shoes with them. So if they take everything off, they can slip their shoes back on, but they're getting back in the cab, and we worry about the wet stuff once we get back to the station. It's a matter of common sense. If it's too cold, you don't do it. You wait till you get back to the station and worry about it.
Great. Actually, believe this question is also going to be for you, Chief. If an ice machine cannot be moved, is there a way to cover it? Marcia is asking.
I would say no, because I would suspect that what you can't see is going to get through whatever plastic or whatever you have the covering over it, and it's eventually still going to make its way into the ice machine. My non-scientific guess at that.
Someone asked, are there any solutions for other way to decon of turnout gear and removing PFAS, new technology like liquid CO2? We're still working on it.
Liquid CO2, anybody? So much leadership here.
Never heard of that.
Yes.
I talked to a company that's doing that. So I had a conversation with a company who is doing it in either Indiana or Illinois. My problem, my reservation with that is strictly there's no science. They've done some studies and they present it to UL, and UL has endorsed their study. And I think that may mean that the process of that study, I don't know if it actually means the results. Once I see some results, then I would feel a little bit more comfortable, but I know I believe it's occurring overseas, but I just haven't seen the science to support it yet. It sounds positive, but I just haven't seen the science yet.
Thank you very much. Richard is asking if the decontamination does not remove the PFAS from our turnout gear, then is our turnout gear always contaminated?
The question is our turnout gear always contaminated? The studies on PFAS are continuing. I think right now we're concentrating our process to do the best we can to reduce the contaminants on what we currently have. I would let the science continue to weigh in on that. I couldn't say the gear is always contaminated because I don't think the information out there is fully vetted yet. So from our standpoint, this is whether it has PFAS in it or not. It's now been laden with known carcinogens that weren't on it before the fire. We got to get that off at least first. Let's work on that side of it. This is every single fire that we're on. And as far as that, to answer that question, I don't have a real good answer regarding PFAS because I don't think the information is out there yet.
Thank you. Anybody else has a question? Wait, I saw him. Okay. All right. Well, great. Thank you very much. Well, we had a break scheduled for 3:30, so I guess we'll have a little bit of an earlier break. You get a 15-minute back, and then we'll just meet at the main ballroom. Thank you.